Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Today, as you can see, we've stepped outside because indoor is rather hot. So yeah, guys, again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you guys that have been following this show. I hope you guys are learning, because that's my job, to make sure that at the end of the day, I'm teaching you guys things that you can use in your life, and things that will definitely make sure that you're generating a better return on your investments. So guys, thank you one more time. And if you guys are new, this is the first time you guys see it, please do subscribe. I think you'll hit the subscribe button over there. Also ring the bell if you want, to make sure that you guys are getting my videos as soon as I drop them. So without any further ado, or without any extra delays, guys, let's jump into today's topic. Today's topic, guys, is risk. Let's start off by defining what risk is. Guys, risk is the uncertainty of a desired result not being met. So to break it down to you guys, risk is basically when you desire to meet a certain amount, or desire to get a certain return, and whatever return you get is not what you desired. So if you want 10% and you end up with a return of 6%, so the risk is that. So that is in itself risk. So as an investor, guys, it's very important that you are aware of the risks that are involved with every investment that you go into. And one way to do this, guys, first and foremost, is to definitely know what your risk appetite is. So once you identify with your risk appetite, guys, it's a matter of you need to then make sure that you're getting into investments that speak to your risk appetite. So if you're asking, how do you then find out what your risk appetite is? So the way that you can go about this is that you can fill out a risk profile questionnaire. You can find it on the internet. And for those who do have financial advisors, I'm sure they have gone through this process, because as an advisor, you have to understand your client's risk appetite. So you can fill that out. And once you fill it out, you can understand what your risk appetite is. So there's 3 different types of risk appetites that I'm going to talk to you guys about today. So the first one being conservative, then the next one being moderate, and then the last one is aggressive. So whether you are conservative, moderate, aggressive, it's a matter of you need to understand what each and every one of them does entail. So even if you are conservative, doesn't mean that you cannot take out investments that are aggressive. It doesn't mean that, but at least you will have that understanding as to, I know I am conservative and I know what being conservative entails, but right now I am feeling maybe there's an opportunity for me to invest in a more aggressive investment. So do understand what each and every one of them entail. So let me start explaining what conservative basically is. So a conservative kind of investor is an investor that basically wants to protect his capital. So his main thought process when he's entering into investment is to protect his capital. So he's not more interested in the amount of return he can get. So typical is people who have just retired. After you retire, because you know the only the capital that you have and the capital that you might have in future is the capital that you have now amassed in the time you're working. So your pension fund, once it gets paid to you, you know this money has to help you survive for the rest of your life. So you don't want to gamble with that money. You want to take too much risks with that money. So being conservative will basically mean that you want that amount preserved or protected so it can pay you an income over time. Next, we get moderate. So moderate investors are investors that also do want to protect their income, but they're also worried about the amount of interest they can then generate. Typical are your middle-aged people. So maybe let's say from the age of 40 to 55. Yeah, let's say from the age of 40 to 55, where you are still growing your capital. But whilst you're growing your capital, you also want to make sure that you're not getting too risky with it, because you're soon going to retire. So you're working towards gaining capital for your retirement money, but you don't want to gamble with it as much. So the last one we're going to talk about, guys, is aggressive. So aggressive is basically young guys, young professionals that, well, you got a high salary, probably just started the family, but you want to grow your capital, and you're more worried about how far you can grow your capital, because you got years to basically make mistakes, recover from those mistakes, see market crashes, recover from those market crashes. And most of the time, those are the people that seek equity portfolios. So equity exposed portfolios, the people that want to make sure that they're in the markets and they're getting as much return as they can get from the markets in the time that they want to grow that income. So yeah, those talk about your three risk appetites. So it's very important that you do understand that. And once you do understand that, guys, you can then move to your next level of investing, or your next step of investing. In case right now is when you're now selecting those investments that speak to your risk appetite. So guys, now that we do know that there is risk, how do we then reduce the risk that we're getting exposed to? So there are investment, guys, that you can get into that will give you a low exposure to risk. But because of that low exposure to risk, most of the time they do also come with low returns. So for those that want to enter into more riskier investments because they are chasing higher returns, the way you can also avoid risk in that regard is if you diversify. So what is diversification, guys? Diversification basically means that you are going to buy investments in different asset classes so that you mitigate the exposure you have to a certain asset. So in investment, there is 4 asset classes that I will just let you guys know about. So you've got stocks, you've got bonds, you've got property, and you've got cash. So by entering any one of them and only being exposed to that one, it just means that you're getting exposed solely to the risk of that one. So diversify will just mean that you are going across all different asset classes to get exposure to all of them. So just in case your property market drops, most chances is that your stocks would go up, and if your stocks do go up, they will offset the losses from your property drop. So that's the reasons that you will diversify your portfolio. So you don't want to, like the saying says, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if that basket is to fall, all your eggs are going to be broken. So by diversifying, it just means that you're going to then just get exposure from all your different asset classes. So you also need to understand the risk that you're getting into. Understand what investment that you are willing to take. Understand the investment. So if you want to invest, for example, if you want to invest in farming, make sure that you at least understand what farming is about. Doesn't mean that you have to be a farmer or you have to have farming background. No, just understand at least what farming entails. So farming, as we know, is a long-term thing, because you don't grow crops now and 2 months later they have grown and you've got maize. It doesn't work like that. Farming is long-term. So everything farming related is long-term. So if you want to invest in farming, that's the type of thinking that you have to have in mind. It's nothing quick. So another thing that I'll say is that your high risk investments are most of the time also your highest returning investments, like your stocks and your property. They will give you a lot of return, but that's a lot of risk. So also know what you're doing when you do enter into property as well as into stocks. So to wrap this up, guys, we need to understand that we cannot avoid risk. Risk will always be there, but ways to mitigate or ways to control or lessen the exposure of risk is to understand the investment you're going into. So first you need to do a risk profile questionnaire so that you understand your risk appetite. Once you know what your risk appetite is then when you know type of investments you should be going into. It doesn't mean necessarily you should only focus on those investments, but at least you know which ones you should have most exposure to. So from there on, it's a matter of how do you also reduce your risk? How do you make sure that you're not getting exposed to as much risk? Understand the investment you're also going into. So those are the steps, guys. Follow those to a T. Try not to get into too much risk. If you don't understand it, stay away from it. Please get into investments that you understand, guys. If it's something like a Bitcoin and you're not understanding it, don't go into it, guys. Forex, if you don't understand Forex, no matter how many times people try to explain to you, do not go into it. So only go into investments that you feel safe and investments that you do understand. So thank you again for joining me, guys. That is the show for today. Hope you tune in again. Adios.